Good morning, and welcome to the Cyber Smart Morning News Update. With the always evolving world of cyber threats and defense, you need a source you can trust. FBI retired Special Agent Darren Mott guides you through today's intricate cyber landscape and brings you the latest headlines and insights and what it means to you. Let's dive into today's cyber news.
Good morning, friends. It is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. This is the Cyber Smart Morning News Update. I am your host, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darren Mott. And in this episode, I'm doing something a little differently. So on Tuesday, I recorded the most recent episode of the Tactical Cyber Podcast with my host, Paul Perry. And we had a guest on named Gentry talking about deterrence in the cyber domain. And I thought it was a really good episode. And so in place of this podcast today, you're going to get a little longer episode. This is going to actually be the Tactical Cyber episode, episode 5. Part of it is to get more people to be aware that I'm doing another podcast. And if you like it, you can go listen to those podcasts as well, or just start listening. I do that as also done as a live stream. So you're certainly welcome to check that out. So we will get back to regular news programming on Friday. I'll actually not do the Friday op-ed. I'll do actually a news report Friday. But for this episode, please sit back and enjoy the Tactical Cyber Podcast with Paul Lane, our special guest, Gentry Lane.
Welcome to the Tactical Cyber Podcast, where we transform strategic cyber insights into actionable tactics for everyday implementation. Join your hosts, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darren Mott and Risk Advisory Practice Leader at Warren Averett, Paul Perry. Together, they bring decades of experience from the front lines of cybersecurity and risk management to help business owners and individuals take the actions that will keep their business and personal digital data safe. Each episode, we delve into the world of cybersecurity, sharing real-world experiences, expert interviews, and practical tips to safeguard your digital landscape. It's time to move past cyber strategies and start working cyber tactics.
Hello, friends. It is, what is today? Monday. It's Tuesday. Yesterday was Monday. It's Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. This is the Tactical Cyber Podcast. I am your host and live stream. I'm your host, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darren Mott. Let me bring in my co-host, Paul Perry from Warren Averett. Paul, good.
What's up, Darren?
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good. We're going to bring in our guest, Gentry Lane. I've been looking forward to this one for a couple of weeks.
Been talking about it.
Yeah, so I heard Gentry on Chase Cunningham's podcast a couple weeks ago, and I said I have to immediately contact this lady because as she was talking to Chase, who was our first guest in the first episode, I was getting whiplash from nodding my head up and down so much with everything she was saying. So we'll bring her in a minute, but we want to get right to the news of the day first. So I'll bring up mine real quick, and this one kind of ties into what we're going to talk about today, because today we're going to talk about, I'm looking for my military or law enforcement deterrence. Which one is better? Can they do the things together? How do we use those two deterrent mechanisms in the cyber domain, right? And it's complicated because you have the military has certain requirements and authorizations that they can do, or authorities rather. The law enforcement has certain authorities that they can and can't do. So how do we find the best thing to do with all that? But this particular article kind of brings this into place because, when you think of the military deterrence in the cyber realm, you're thinking cyber warfare deterrence. And you can argue, or I have argued, that we are kind of in the midst of a cyber war now. If you look at the cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure. So Halliburton, a fairly large oil company, or energy company, confirmed its systems were hacked and that intruders accessed and exfiltrated information following a cyber attack last week. Now, they didn't really get into the details of what that cyber attack was. My guess, it's probably ransomware with a data exfiltration component, because that's kind of how ransomware is working now, and that's how all of these things are going on. The one thing we probably never learn, because we never learn this in any of these, is how it happened. We may find out who the actors are, because if the actors actually exfiltrated data, don't get their ransom, they will threaten to publish what they stole. And then we'll know who it was. I mean, it seems like Ransom Hub is the group that's getting all the press lately. But ultimately, what will law enforcement do to this? They will go and they will perform some forensics, and they will say, sorry, that happened to you, and then we'll kind of end it. What will the military do? Probably they won't have authority to do much, though. This is likely Russian actors hitting critical infrastructure.
And I think that from the private sector, I mean, they don't always know what's going on, right? And so I think that's part of the private sector's issue is what else is happening out there. And so the company just wants to get made whole, get corrected, and that is just an issue that keeps popping up. And I mean, I didn't have an article to send you because every article I read was, is this a ransomware gang out of this? You talk about the nation state warfare has to be going on. We know it's going on. To what extent is it going on with ransomware gangs that are not nation state backed, but the nation states allow them to operate within their borders? And that's probably one of the things that is that people are seeing as well. And so trying to make heads or tails of who's doing what and who's involved sometimes is a cat and mouse game. I can imagine. Right.
And with that, since we're on this topic, let's bring in our guest because I know her time is valuable, so I don't want to waste a lot of it. She is the CEO of Nemesis Global. Hopefully I got the name of the company right. Her name is Gentry Lane. Gentry, thanks so much for taking the time to pop on with us two little guys in Alabama to talk about this topic.
Oh, yeah, sure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I didn't realize we're doing this live, so no swearing.
No, you can. I don't care. That's fine. I can mark it that it was. So if you want to, it's fun. Trust me. When we get into talking if we talk politics at all, I probably won't be able to help myself anyway. So
yeah, likewise.
Yeah. So let's give us a little bit about your background. I know it, but for the folks who this is the first time hearing you, if they didn't hear you on Chase's podcast, I don't know if you heard me, but when I first heard you talking on Chase, I got whiplash because I was going like this the whole time because all the stuff you were saying, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. What can I say? I have a little bit of a weird background. My background's mostly in software. I didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to start a cybersecurity company because there aren't enough of those in the world. There's too many. And the thing that sort of pushed me in this direction and got me connected with all the people and all the things that made this company and this product happen is I got a call from the FBI and they wanted to know if I was a Russian hacker, and I'm not. But they should have known that. And it got me thinking, like, if the authorities don't have situational awareness into APT activity, APT is advanced persistent threats, bad guys, they can't see what the bad guys are doing in the US, how are we going to stop them?
Right.
It got me thinking about deterrence and law enforcement deterrence and military deterrence and the difference and what you use in what situation and the conundrums we have.
Yeah, so I think as we talk this, right, you can kind of talk to the military piece, I can talk to the law enforcement piece, and Paul kind of talk about what the private sector wants, desires, and why they're so frustrated, right? So when you talk about military deterrence in the cyber domain, what do you define that for us?
Well, there's two types of deterrence. PhD students will write theses saying that there's more, but there's not. There's deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. And the easiest way to remember that deterrence by punishment is what you think it is. If you do this, you get punished, something, a painful punishment of some kind. It could be hurting you, it could be taking something away. Deterrence by denial means you have to reliably deny the adversary mission success. So they look at this scenario and say, it's not worth it. So it has to compromise the deterrent effect has to compromise their risk calculus, and the cost benefit analysis. So they have to look at it and say, like, yeah, I might be able to get away with it, but I'm not going to because it'll be, it won't be worth it.
Right. And, and on the law enforcement side, they just want to put somebody in jail, right? That's you can't do it anymore deterrence. That's pretty much it. Or honestly, at where it's come to in cyber world is really no one's going to jail. Occasionally you will get the occasional arrest with the NATO company or NATO country that helps arrest somebody who did something wrong. And they may get extradited and they may ultimately go to jail. But what we've been seeing lately, the deterrence they can simply do, and it's not even really deterrence, if you look at the ransomware groups, is to take down their infrastructure, right? To find their dark website where they're sharing all the information they stole. Well, and I've said this many times on my other podcast, is that's great that you did that, but they have 5 other backups that they're just going to bring online tomorrow, right? So I mean, again, you still have to do that. The Department of Justice can't just say, well, we're just going to raise up our hand and say, if you're overseas, you're good to go. Have at it. We can't really help you. And in 2007, 2008, when I was with the FBI, I started a thing at headquarters to try to work with the Russians on this kind of stuff. So I got to go to Russia several times, and I got to go to the Hermitage after having a lunch with the Russians, with all they did was, serve us vodka and say, hey, you're not going to go walk around the Hermitage for 4 hours. So I saw the Fabergé eggs 3 times. They always started at the same spot, and it's supposed to be a very lovely museum. I remember very little of it because I had a lot of vodka before they took me there. And no one ever, we solved very little, honestly. And then from the ATP, obviously China, we're not going to if you're a Chinese APT actor, you're immune. You're never going to jail unless you're stupid enough to say, I'm going to go to Vietnam and have a party or something, and they're able to track you. So, and so Paul, from the private sector perspective, what do you want? What is the private sector hoping for?
Yeah, that's a good question, Darren. And Gentry, nice to meet you and glad to have you on the podcast. I think that the private sector just doesn't understand everything that y'all just said. Like, to a basic degree, they just want to know, as a company that's been hacked, how do I get corrected? Who corrects me? And what happens to the person that did this to me? Unfortunately, as you probably can allude to, and I always tell people in all my presentations, look, this is a need to know industry. The military, the law enforcement will tell you when you need to know something. Otherwise, you just have to go with the assumption that they're doing something to help you. The problem is people in the private sector feel very defenseless, right? I can only do my stuff to protect my things. Do I have help? Yes. Do we talk about it? No, because if we talk about it, we're not going to be doing it anymore, right? From a military perspective.
But they are defenseless.
Right.
The private sector, civilian companies have been drafted and deployed to the front lines of a real live armed cyber conflict, because cyber weapons are weapons.
Right.
And they have no strategy, no synchronization, no leader, inadequate defenses that are, not equally distributed. Like, this is like how you lose a war.
Right. And I think that's where the private sector gets frustrated, because it's like, hey, we're out there on the front line, but we can't. I remember at a presentation, somebody asked, well, when can the private sector, what can we do from an offensive perspective? And I remember the law enforcement agent standing up there said, well, if you do something, I have to go after you because that's not your job. Right. And so what else can we do from a private sector perspective? And so I think we have to, and I try to preach this all the time, Darren's heard me say it many times, we have to use law enforcement. We have to understand military's helping us in some form or fashion. We just will never know about it until after it's done.
But
and
then
so we have to have that trust.
You have a misalignment, though,
right?
Because now you have law enforcement protecting domestic entities from nation state or state sponsored militaries, because these are militarized cyber commands, except for, like you say, the proxies, which are, sanctioned by the Kremlin.
Sure.
Right.
There's also the Posse Comitatus.
Comitatus. Posse Comitatus. Posse Comitatus. Yep.
That, we want and we have, because we don't want a military presence in the homeland. It's very important that a free democracy doesn't have our military standing on every corner. But that means that they can't protect us from here. Fort Meade is here, but all of their operations happen on adversary networks. Like, you can't have the military come in and work on, who just got hacked. Just name someone who got hacked.
Halliburton.
Yeah, Halliburton. They can be invited to come in, but there's so many of them that no, they can't protect everybody at once. So we have to establish a condition of deterrence, and what's going to work, and how is that going to work out, and who's going to maintain it, and who's in charge. Like, that's the main question.
I think that's the big problem, because the one deterrence we haven't talked about yet, which we don't want to talk about ever having to exist, is political deterrence. Because you have the politicians who figure, well, the FBI's not doing it. The military can't do it, so I will do it. I will solve the cyber. I will do the cyber, and the cyber will be solved because I have been elected to sit in the Senate seat, and I know how to do the cyber.
No one, absolutely no one in Congress knows how to do the cyber.
I know, but they keep coming up with new cyber. This is the cyber we're going to do today.
Oh yeah, let's designate cyber as a terrorist activity. I'm like, well, no, it's not a terrorist activity, because here's the definition of terrorism. Here's the definition of war.
Right.
It meets the definition of war and not terrorism. So don't do that.
Yep, and I think that particular designation suggestion came out just as I was getting ready to call you. I think we had that conversation the next day when they said that CyBUr was going to be designated as a terrorist event. But I mean, it's, and the thing is with the military, militaries want to blow stuff up. They want to kill the adversary. And then you're not killing anybody. It's hard to kill the technology. So it makes it very hard, even if you gave them the mission or the authority, to be able to, because you have to attribute it to. It's all those other things. How do you, is that the right target? Is that really who you want to hit?
Yeah, no, the DoD definitely devalues cyberspace as an operational domain, and it's not fair. And I don't necessarily want to kill people, but I love killing people in cyberspace.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and if you kill their infrastructure, you're killing their essence, right? Because they just can't do what they want to do. And it's not like, and let's be honest, it's not just the U.S. that is having this problem with figuring out how to do military deterrence. All of our NATO allies, that when the FBI arrests somebody in the Ukraine, clearly Ukrainian government and other associated countries in NATO, Denmark, or not Denmark, but the Netherlands is one I always think, because they're very friendly to us. They clearly can do it. So, they have different authorities. Why aren't they doing it? Why aren't other countries taking their military and doing the same thing? I think it's a global issue. The only people who aren't having a problem with the military doing it are the APT countries. Have no problem with their military doing it.
Well, because if one country does have an established condition of deterrence, it only protects that country. The bad guys are going to go, we'll just go to the next country next to them. So everybody has to be on the same page. Getting everyone on the same page is really, really, really hard. I have a position in NATO also. I think I forgot to say that. So everyone thinks that NATO is this big organized thing, and like all the member countries come together and they say, oh yes, we will all do this, we will all do that. It's the exact opposite. Like if, Finland says we're going to do this, Sweden doesn't. And it's a mess.
And clearly, what is it? Is it clause 5? What is the TAC 1?
Article 5.
Article 5, right? Article 5. If the UK is bombed by China, NATO will come to its defense, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, everybody's getting bombed by China now, but no one's going to anybody's defense. Exactly what you said, right? So
yeah, it's also because like I said, we devalue the domain, and we're using the wrong metrics for damage. Like the DoD doesn't have a BDA, it doesn't have a battle damage assessment for blue space. So like when the bad guys attack us, we just quick fix it. Triage is not the best way of doing things. We would never do that, and if it were a kinetic effect. But yeah, because we don't have a battle damage assessment framework, we're using frameworks from physical domains. And I get it, but rubble is not, rubble and body count is not the accurate way to assess cyber domain damage. It's more about pain and quantifying pain, which we know how to do.
Right. In 2012, President Obama came out with his initial write-up for OFCO and offensive cyber operations, defensive cyber operations. And I don't know if it ever got signed. I don't know if do you remember? I remember seeing the first draft of it come out in 2012, and I don't know if it ever went anywhere. Go ahead. We're
doing OCO.
Yeah, sure. But this was like some kind of new methodology. This is what you will and won't do. And that's in that arena. When you're talking, and the entities that do it are all at top secret level, so you're never going to know that it happens, right? So you can't even benefit from doing it because you can't tell the companies you're protecting that you're doing it for them. I remember getting these documents from the NSA and saying, go talk to this company that they've been hacked because here's their data, but you can't tell them the IP address it came from. So how are they supposed to find it? Can't give you any information on it because I understand the rationale for it, but it's an ineffective anything, really.
Yeah, they do. They use intermediaries like you, like me,
right. Yep.
So, Gentry, how do we make this? How do we have effective solutions around deterrence? Like, what is crystal ball? What's the ultimate answer? Cost is no option, and there's collaboration across the table, because that's got to be one of the heaviest lifts is the collaboration amongst all the different entities. But what does effective deterrence solutions look like?
Yeah, the collaboration, you definitely have to lead with a carrot, not follow with a stick. US is not great about that. It's not like a theory of mine, or it is a theory, but the DoD and DHS gave me millions of dollars to figure this out. Like, can we have can we operationalize deterrence in the cyber domain? And which one is it going to be? Is it deterrence by punishment or deterrence by denial? Has to be deterrence by denial. Deterrence by punishment, we can't keep up. And then how do you operationalize deterrence by denial? And we looked at that. My team, I was working at, I'm not going to say which one online, but I was working at one of the federally funded research and development labs, top secret lab, working on top secret stuff. And this is what we're working on. How do we establish a condition of deterrence in the cyber domain, just like we have in all the other warfighting domains? Because deterrence by denial is what's keeping them out from attacking us. They could attack us land, sea, air. They could, like all the bad air, our northern border is wide open. Any bad guy can come in if they want, but they don't. So why not? And so we figured out the things, that we need, the capability gaps that we don't have in the cyber domain, and how we figured out how to put them there. And that's what my company does. It's a big global. I don't want to do like a sales pitch here though, but it's a big global interoperable cyber defense platform. It's infrastructure for the cyber domain. That's what we needed. We need like a big mechanism like radar that gives us, traditional visibility, early warning, one global interoperable system that everybody, civilian sector and militaries and, allied and unallied militaries can all tap into, just for the good guys only, kind of like SWIFT, the SWIFT financial industry thing network.
The money transfer portal for the international.
Yeah. So Russia and China aren't on it, and it puts them at a big disadvantage. So how do we do that? Like, how do we get this everybody on the same page? And that's what we did. We used a bunch of fancy math for early detection, rapid attribution, streamlined intelligence sharing in a totally privacy preserving way, because nobody wants the government in their computer.
Right.
I mean, even I don't, and we know. So yeah, it's complicated is the answer, but it's possible. And it's totally hilarious too, because look, this was a government grant, government funding, and a significant amount. Does the DoD use our software? No, it's impossible. But is NATO using it? Yes. It's ridiculous.
Well, the DoD not using it because it's not ATO'd yet? Is that their issue?
Yeah, like stupid things like that.
Right. So So ATO, for those who are not in the defense field, is authority to operate. Basically, you have to do all of this stuff to show the DoD that your system complies with what they think is the requirement to be able to be part of their system.
Even though I had to have like super high security clearance to be able to understand what their system was, to build this just for their system. So we're waiting.
There will be a politician that will cyber it for you and make it work, I'm sure.
Oh God.
So Darren, I'll ask you a question. So from a law enforcement perspective, that's what the private sector has. That's the only the only deterrence the private sector really can operate with or collaborate with. We just have to understand that the other is going on, whether we like knowing or not knowing. That's the only way we can do it is with law enforcement deterrence. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's all. Right. If you're a private sector, you're not calling the Pentagon saying, "Hey, someone's in my system. Can you help me out?" But even honestly, if you go to the FBI, you go to Secret Service, because those are, from a federal perspective, those are the two main federal entities. CISA is more of a proactive. They're not really a reactive entity per se. They'd like to be, but they're not so much. But Secret Service is only going to deal with financial-oriented type stuff. And the FBI kind of has the mandate for a bunch of other crap. But then the problem you're going to get into is, okay, we can come in, I used to tell people, look, don't be afraid to call the FBI. They're not going to come in with their raid jackets and take all your computers, and you're going to be out for 7 months while we do the forensic piece. We're going to, if we can do the forensics on site, we can. If we determine we don't need to do forensics because we know it's this particular ransomware group and maybe we have a key, maybe we don't, or just do your backups, then that's kind of the only approach you can call your local law enforcement. They're probably going to say call the FBI or call the Secret Service. So
what if you didn't have to call anyone? What if the authorities could see APT behavior without seeing inside your computer?
That would be great. Right.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and are there the personnel to do it, right? Is that another issue? Is that a resource issue now too, that you have this?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's the problem, because the people that really need to be watched the most are companies that nobody's ever heard of,
Right.
like critical infrastructure. Everyone thinks of water and electricity, but I'm worried about the cold storage, medical transport facility that only has 5 endpoints. So of course they don't have a CISO. They have the guy who changes the toner is the guy who does their cybersecurity. And that's what I'm worried about, because if that goes offline, then we don't have vaccines. Like it's weird companies that you've never heard of, or the regular world has never heard of. Those are the ones that need more protection than everybody else.
Sure. And let me ask this question. What is their presence like if I'm an APT actor? Is it easy for me to find who they are and where they are? Are they that much exposed that it's certainly detectable, even though the rest of the world doesn't know it exists?
Well, yeah, DHS made a list.
Oh, there you go. and it got compromised. That was my guess.
Yeah, DHS used CrowdStrike.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and then also they're in every insurance company.
True. Yeah.
And lawyers. So that's their directory. Some APTs, I did an analysis that was really funny, or it's not funny, it's horrible, but NSA didn't know this. Some we're trying to figure out, how they discern how they choose their targets. Some APT groups go by region, some go by vertical, and one goes alphabetically. Like literally, people show up and they're like, "Here's a list of accountants, hack them all."
Wow.
And
then, and I think that's also private sector's concern, or I will say issue is. They all say, I don't have anything anybody wants, right? Well, you've got information and you've got cash. That's what everybody wants, right? And people just want to make a splash. And where do you find these people? Well, if they're a startup company, they're telling everybody and their brother, hey, we're a startup company. This is what we do. We're the only one that does it. We need funding. Well, guess where that funding comes from? And then guess what happens, right? So it's companies are unaware of the public presence they're creating when they're just trying to run their business.
Yeah, 100%. Right? Yeah. And China is all over that adversary capital.
And they're not thinking of, they think of IT. I've always said this from a culture perspective, everybody from a private sector looks at information technology, looks at information systems and security as an expense. And it's like, you cannot treat it as an expense. You have to treat it as a revenue protector, because if you don't have it, you don't have revenue. And that mindset has to change, right? And nothing military or law enforcement is going to change that. That starts within the private sector. That starts within the culture and the governance of the organization. And that's why there's a need for more governance around information security as it relates to the private sector. We can look at the military, we can look at law enforcement and say, hey, this is what we should be doing. And we need to know who those people are. Like we've said it before on many podcasts, Darren, this one and others. Don't let the day you have a breach, the day you introduce yourself to the local law enforcement. Like you've got to know who they are beforehand, and you've got to be proactive. That's the only thing we can do. Unfortunately, we have humans that work for us. They're going to make errors. They're going to get compromised, especially if it's something like from China, and you're getting people infiltrated. And here's $50,000. What do you have? That kind of thing. You've got to understand that that's the way it's happening, and you've got to protect yourself, because military law enforcement can only do so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So how do we get to? So I think one of the big issues between military and law enforcement is the lack of information sharing. Now we've talked on this podcast about the lack of sharing between the public and private sector. And certainly there's been talk about it forever that we need to be able to share information between the public and private sector. But then the problem gets into who's going to maintain that, who's going to run that, and all that other stuff. But I think there's even a larger issue amongst the three-letter agencies. At least certainly we have liaisons, right? The FBI has liaisons within DOD, within NSA, within CIA, and then they all have liaisons back to us. But there's always that, for lack of a better way to say it, dick length contest, right? So the ability to share that information, I think that's where we fall down as a country as well, is the organizations just don't want to share, are afraid that if they share it, it's going to impact their budget at the end of the year or something like that.
But fine. So the government can keep being stupid.
Right.
They don't have to share, because 85% of the attack surface is in the private sector. Mm-hmm. Like my main thing with us, we know that Russia attacks Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania first. They try out their TTP there. If it works, then they'll use it on Poland and Ukraine, and then here. So we really need to know what's happening in those countries first. So it was super important to get into their networks and get a foothold into their intelligence. And they have like minuscule, one country literally has a cyber command of 25 people, and get them the situational awareness so we can see what's happening there, and then share it with the civilian sector even before I share it with the government.
Yeah, but the problem is we just don't. The companies get compromised, and I don't know if this is a global problem. It probably is, but they don't want to say, they don't want to do the postmortem. Here's how we got hacked. Here's what happened. Here's the TTPs. Here's what you need to know.
Yeah, no, totally. And can you blame them because it's super expensive?
Yeah.
And you have to have a person, and that's another whole problem with the cybersecurity industry. We make everything expensive, everything complicated, everything with so much jargon and like almost arrogance that to have people think that they can't understand it. It's not that.
Yeah, and
hard.
the other part we is the media doesn't portray it right either. That's the hard part. Is it's displayed like when CrowdStrike happened, I was on the TV 4 times that day on 4 different TV stations on 4 different states because I said, hey, can you come talk to us about CrowdStrike? And I had to say, someone wrote the code wrong. What's your problem? I mean, sure, it was bad. Sure, they did it right. They should have tested it. Should have rolled it out bit by bit. But everybody thinks everybody gets hard. Cyber's hard. I'd say I don't understand it, and really, it's just a tool, and bad guys are just using the tool better than the good guys are using the tool to stop the bad guys.
And I always say it's just like a regular old robbery or break-in. You have to get initial access, and then you have to evade detection, and then it's not. If you look at it from that point of view, it's easier, I think, for the general public to understand.
So it is, but then you don't have a face to put with it, right? On a physical robbery, you've got a camera, probably you've got a physical being. We don't know if it's the 35-year-old in China or the 12-year-old down the street, right? Nobody knows that. And I think back to your other point, technology for folks that don't deal in technology, and I will put cybersecurity in the technology realm, they just throw their hands up and go, that's somebody else's problem. Because I don't understand it, and because I don't understand it, I don't want to have to deal with it, right? And so I tell people all the time in my presentations, look, I'm not asking you to write code. I'm not asking you to understand what the code says. I'm asking you to understand why it's there and what is important. And if you can understand that, then you can understand the other aspect. People don't get it, and nor do they want to. And it's, hey, I'm not the IT guy. That's somebody else's problem. I'm just over here doing X, Y, or Z for my company. It has nothing to do with technology. Don't ask me questions. And I think that's part of the culture issue is we've got to create a better awareness so that everybody thinks that way and it helps the collective whole, right?
Yeah, 1,000%.
So you're queen for a day. How do you solve it?
Oh, I did. That's what my company does.
I know. So how do we get it past where it is now? Like we're stuck with, it's. But again, it's. I mean, if I polled 100 people, I'm not sure if they'd ever heard of your company. Maybe that's by design, right? Maybe
that's totally by design.
Sure. Yeah, because the bad guys would say, "Hey, let's go find out what these people are doing and why they're causing us such pain."
Yeah, and on LinkedIn, it looks like we only have 3 people working there. No. But
so how's it? So how is it working well in the countries that are at least allowing you to do it?
Yes, because I built it. Yeah. So.
And so they don't.
I love that.
So do they not require either the military or the law enforcement? Is prevent it? So I'm assuming it's preventing it before it gets to that point, right?
No, it actually doesn't prevent. Anybody who says they can detect and prevent are lying. You can only do one of them well. So we just detect, and we detect way earlier than everybody else. And either it alerts the person who's on staff, and it shows you like exactly where you need to look, not only just on the computer, but in each of the systems, or it alerts the SOC and the coop in the background that will come out and help them. But again, it's like super automatic. They don't need to, you don't need a forensic expert, but it's running like forensics proactively at scale to find the bad guys while they're still in memory. So 4 times earlier, way earlier than everybody else. But again, that's just a party trick. That's just neat. main part of it is the connecting. And like you asked earlier, like nobody wants to share information, but because the way we share it in the cyber domain is so stupid. Why, you know who shares information really well? The financial industry. Like our credit cards, they're accurate, they're secure, we trust them, and they work every time. What's it sharing? Binary data. That's what I'm sharing. They use the same algorithmic process and the same sort of, yeah.
All right, Gentry. So how do people reach out to us? Let's say I'm a company. So if I'm a company, let's say I'm a Fortune 5,000 company and I want to protect myself. Can I come to you and use your product?
Yeah. We're critical infrastructure prioritized first.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, but I mean, certainly there's plenty of those because I mean the whole defensive industrial base is critical infrastructure. They all need it.
We're partnering with I think I can say which one because we haven't signed the final deal yet. But we're partnering with an insurance agency, and that awesome. I think we're aligned with the insurance world. Now, they didn't used to think like this. I spoke at an insurance tech conference a few years ago, and one of the, I want to say so bad.
That's fine.
One of the big reinsurers came up and explained to me afterwards that no, he really likes selling policies that don't cover anything.
Right. Yeah, sure.
I was like, oh my God, that's not sustainable. Now they're starting to figure it out. And there's a couple really good cyber or insurance companies that have.
Yeah, because they're focused on that, right? They want, because they know everybody wants cyber insurance. The problem they get into is they don't do what they need to do to keep their controls in place so that when they have a claim, they can say, we still did everything right. So you still have to, so you didn't have to pay it. But the insurance company, like you said, the old ones don't want them to do anything right because they think, hey, sorry, this clause, you didn't meet this clause, so we don't have to pay out. But
it should be required. And Paul, to your point earlier about regulation, like this is the only time in your life you're going to hear me say, I think we should have more regulation. But but yeah, it should be required, and the sort of regulation or relationship we should have is like the FAA, Federal Aviation. They work together really well. It's not an antagonistic relationship, airlines and the FAA. We need something like that.
And from the insurance perspective, a lot of times people will say, yes, we do this, and it's self-reporting, right? And that's the problem. We've seen that too often where 12 questions were asked, they answered yes, and 11 were false, right? That's going to get them not getting any help. And then they're going to even be more frustrated with law enforcement and military, and nobody else is helping me, and I don't have any help on this. And it's like, well, you've got to turn the responsibility on yourself to some degree. And if you can show you've done it all, then yes, you should get some help. But if you falsely say I'm doing this, that's a major issue.
Yeah.
So we have a question from LinkedIn. Daniel Bruner wants to know, how do you feel about military conducting cyber operations on U.S.? Well, we tried to talk about Posse Comitatus. She can't really do it, but yeah, there you go. It's conflict. Okay. So Daniel's a former Bureau. Welcome to the club, Dan. You may have hit there before I did, but thanks for popping on. But go ahead and talk about it. I mean, we did briefly talk about this, but let's say the next administration came in and said, with the cyber problem, we're going to give an exception for Posse Comitatus, and the military can go forth and conquer. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, that means the civilian sector are responsible for defending themselves. So like everybody can have a surface to air missile on their ceiling as on their roof.
No, only for cyber. So let's say you can have the military come in and do offensive cyber operations against if you want. So you get hacked, they can come in and they can hack back. They say that.
That happens a little bit, but it's not. It's too big. Like we don't have enough people to do it. We have way more companies than we have cyber commandos. So
and it comes down to the same thing we talked about earlier: attribution. Okay, sure, you got hacked. How do you know where you're going? How do you know who you're going to attack against? So, and sadly, it's never going to come to this point. For that simple reason, is because DoD is going to be they don't want to hit the wrong target, right? I mean, they're concerned about collateral damage. So I guess that would be the concern if you hit the wrong target, even cyber wise. I mean, let's say you hit the wrong country's energy infrastructure, they're going to be pretty pissed, and that's going to be a little different than just a simple hack. It's going to be considered an act of war.
But we don't do that. We don't attack civilian critical infrastructure.
True. Yeah, sure. No, that's right.
We play by the rules.
But we could.
I know. Yeah. Trust me, I want to.
Well, Gentry, if people want to locate you or find you, how can they do so?
LinkedIn. Is this where we're broadcasting?
Yeah, LinkedIn and YouTube. Actually, I have a banner here with your LinkedIn information, if I can bring it up.
Awesome.
The ticker.
Yeah.
Oh,
My email is glane@nemesis-global.com. Nemesis is the Greek goddess of divine retribution.
Very nice. Perfect.
Interesting.
Excellent.
Interesting.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come here
Absolutely.
and pop on with us. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation, and it's something I'm sure will be a long-standing conversation amongst a lot of cyber groups going forward, because this is a problem this law enforcement or military, which way are we going, is going to be a constant drumbeat, because they're the only two that can really deter correctly.
Yeah, and both. There should be both.
Right.
I don't know yet how to integrate them so they force multiply each other. But yeah, the FBI has a huge advantage in this domain, and they are not working with the DoD. And
right.
Yeah, it's crazy. But the whole thing is, we need to talk about this more, because there's also like no place. There's no, like I always say, there's no shelling for the cyber domain. There's no place where people are making up policy, but actual operators aren't really talking about tactics and operations like this. So
right, because they're talking strategy. They just want to talk the strategy, and we want to talk the tactics. So hopefully we've solved most of it here today. So
we solved everything.
People can watch this and problem solved. So Gentry, thanks so much for taking the time. You have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Ciao. Bye.
All right. Well, there you go.
Good discussion, Darren. Good guest, because the private sector doesn't talk deterrence from that perspective. They just say somebody's doing something.
Right.
And so it's good for them to have the discussion, to hear the discussion, to create the awareness. It's not tactical, but it's at least putting it on our radar so that we understand what is happening, and that there are people trying to help us.
Right. And there's stuff going right. There's stuff going on at NSA and DoD, but it's all OCONUS. It's outside the country. They're really not doing it domestic. It has to be, right. But that's where the deterrence can happen. If you can stop it before it comes here. And I think her deterrence product that Nemesis Global has, if I had a company, I would say how much and can you come in and put it in? Because
Absolutely.
if it's going to tell me, hey, you're being targeted by this group right now, this is what they want, you're going to put this, you're then going to know you have something someone wants, and you will put up the defenses to stop it, right? Knowing that is the key part. And actually, I think some of that intelligence can be found if you do the right dark web searches for your data on a regular basis, because it's going to move around and disappear and show up and all that kind of stuff.
And I think the other thing is, from a private sector outside of those that understand the dark web, it's this enigma thing that nobody really understands, right? And I don't know what's out there, and I don't know how to get to it. I don't know how to check for it. And there's people like you and others that can check for that thing. And I think that has to be a regular basis. I mean, understanding that I'm a target. And I think there's another, she didn't mention this, but sometimes you've heard some ransomware gangs come out and say, look, we just knew of a vulnerability and we went after it.
Right.
We had no idea who we were hitting.
And it's not right. And
that's not alphabetical. That's not geographical. That's just, you had a vulnerability that you were unaware of. Somebody else knew about it, and they attacked it.
Right. And we didn't really get into this with her, but it's exactly that. It's the people problem. It's like CrowdStrike was a people problem, not a and not it was vulnerable.
Well, and CrowdStrike was a people problem.
It's a unique thing, yeah.
From a societal perspective, it was a misunderstanding.
Yes.
Of this is a cyber attack. No, not really. That's different. And so I think more education is required to continue to get people to the same level. Again, I don't want you to write code. I just want you to understand what the code's supposed to say.
Right. Well, going back to the news at the beginning, the article we should have brought up was national public data.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, they're not going to hit. The bad guys have that data. Are not going to use it to find a vulnerability in the code. They're going to say, "Hey, here's your password. Here's your login. I'm just going to try it, see if it works. Boom, it does. I'm good to go."
Oh my gosh, you don't have multi-factor authentication because it's inconvenient.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That is how I start every presentation. Is let's talk about the inconvenience or the misunderstanding of the inconvenience of multi-factor authentication and how much it can actually help. And why are people not doing it? It's because it's inconvenient, because my life, it has to move at a certain pace, and I can't be bothered by these 10, 20 seconds.
Right. Exactly. Crazy. All right. Well, the same thing we hit on almost every week. Well, Paul, what do you got for the week? Any big conferences coming up where you're speaking?
This week, no. But I've got 4 or 5 CyBUr presentations over the rest of the month. So it's a good discussion. It's a good talk about governance. It's a good talk about you've got to be bought in on all sides. And I think that's what we try to push that. We try to push culture. Hey, you've got to change your culture. You've got to have a culture of awareness. How about you? What you got going on?
Not much really.
When are you doing the podcast from the conference?
Oh yeah, that's 3 weeks. The National CyBUr Summit here in Huntsville is the week of the 23rd of September, I believe. Yeah, it's 3 weeks from today.
I gotcha.
It's 3 weeks from today is the classified brief, and then I'm on the floor the next 2 days, interviewing whoever wants to talk. Whoever wants to. If you're at the CyBUr, if you're at the National CyBUr Summit, stop by the CyBUr Guy booth at the Quantum Research booth. Actually, that's where I'll be with Quantum Research, and I'll be happy to interview you about your product, what you do, why you do it, all that kind of stuff. And I'm supposed to be in a medical conference in November at the beach. But I think I'm doing that. I was supposed to do it remote, but I think I may actually go. They're not paying me for it. No one pays me for anything. I can't figure out how to get paid for speaking.
I thought that's what the book does. I've always been told.
I'm trying.
Hey, where's your book? If you don't have a book.
Speaking of, here's the book. Get CyBUr Smart.
So, I thought that was your gateway in.
Yeah, you'd like to think so, but everybody has no budget for me yet. I remember, this is just a funny story. A couple years ago, I spoke at the Alabama Insurance, whatever their annual thing at Tuscaloosa, right? It was at this big ballroom on the campus, and they said, "Hey, we can't pay for you to speak, but we'd like you to be a keynote, and we'll pay for your hotel room." I'm like, that's fine, whatever. Right. And I get up there, and the first slide they show before I come up is, "Here's our 75 sponsors." No money to pay for me to speak to this. Okay, but anyway, it is what it is. I will speak to anybody who will have me.
That's the thing.
If you speak to any lawyers, tell them that you know a guy who can do dark web searches for their clients. And
that's the thing is the people who are listening, you've got to tell folks, have more of the conversation, have the speakers come in and talk about it, because that's the only way to really fix the human problem, is to continually talk about the subject almost ad nauseum, right? Mm-hmm. That, oh my gosh, we're talking about this again. Yeah, but you use multi-factor authentication now. Yeah, but you actually read your emails and go, wait, this is a phishing email. I probably shouldn't respond to it. Then what we are saying is working. And that's our ultimate goal in doing this podcast, doing presentations, having these discussions on a regular basis, is we're just trying to make the world better, one person, one multi-factor authentication at a time.
Oh,
right?
That should be our tagline. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
We're solving the world one multi-factor authentication at a time. Yeah,
exactly.
That works.
All right. Well,
we got to find a marketing person. It's got to be short.
Yeah, exactly. When you come up to play pickleball?
Soon.
All right.
There.
All right. Well, Paul, thanks so much. Stick around. We'll talk after this, and I will let everyone else go. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. If you're listening to this on the podcast version, if you're watching it on the live stream, either on YouTube or LinkedIn, thanks so much for doing so. Please feel free to subscribe at whatever platform you are on watching. Paul and I appreciate Gentry Lane for coming on and talking to us about this topic. It was very entertaining. It's different than we've done in the past, but certainly these are conversations that we need to have around the world of cyber. So as you go through your week, know that knowledge is protection. If you can understand the threats targeting you, you can assess your risk. Proceed wisely, and we will continue on with the Tactical CyBUr podcast in a couple weeks, trying to change the world one multi-factor authentication user at a time. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Tactical CyBUr podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. If you have thoughts, comments, or suggestions on the Tactical CyBUr podcast, email Darren at thecyberguy.com. You can also follow Darren and Paul on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/DarrenMott or linkedin.com/in/Paul M. Perry CPA. Paul Perry is a member of Warren Averett CPAs and Advisors, where he leads the firm's risk advisory and assurance services team, a group dedicated to optimizing businesses' financial, operational, and technology controls so that organizations can make strategic choices for sustained growth. Learn more at warrenaverett.com. Stay safe, stay secure, and we'll see you next time.